Hello, my name is Daphne McFerrin. I am the Executive Director of the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis. Our mission is teaching, studying, and promoting civil rights and social change. We are thrilled to bring you the exhibit, Uplift the Vote. Everybody has a voting story. What is yours? This exhibit tells the struggle for the right to vote in Fayette County, Tennessee. Two of the leaders, John and Viola McFerrin, my parents, led this movement, and I'm very proud of their work. But they did not do it alone. They did it with the help of other activists, other African Americans in Fayette County, many of whom risked their homes and lives for the right to vote. In addition, students from northern universities and universities in Tennessee went to Fayette County to aid activists in their struggle for the right to vote. The movement started in 1959 and continued well into the 1980s. Activists sought to integrate public schools, to integrate public facilities, including restaurants and the theater in Somerville. And in 1969, the New York Times called the Fayette County movement one of the longest sustained civil rights protests in the nation. We hope that this exhibit will inspire you to learn more about the Fayette County movement, to protect your right to vote, to register to vote, and to work to make our nation a more just and equal society. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the exhibit.
Many times the registration office was moved without any notification, and Afro-Americans would continue to try to find the registration officer in the courthouse. I recall on one occasion Reverend June Dowdy, an Afro-American minister who was a part of the original Fayette County Civic and Welfare League, went up to register, and he couldn't find the registration office, and he asked a white man that he saw in the courthouse, where were people getting registered? Where is the office for registering? And he was told, we'll register you in Hatcher Bottom. And Hatcher Bottom is a well-known place where black people were carried and lynched back in the years.
Because if they give us power in the ballot box, we could get what we want by putting living folks in office. That's what we was working for.
We found out later there was a blacklist circulated around in the business places in Fayette County and in adjacent counties to Fayette. And this blacklist consisted of names of black people who had registered to vote. And the leadership of this voters registration campaign, their name was marked with an A, which we were told indicated they were troublemakers.
Well, it was a disappointing feeling going into the place I have traded all of my days. And he'd tell me, I went to the bank first, and the bank secretary told me that the banker couldn't help me, couldn't loan me no money. So then I had to try to find where I could borrow some money to make a crop to try to feed my family. And I had to mortgage my little farm to borrow $600. Mortgage the whole farm for $600. Then this man that loaned the $600, he charged interest on it. And I had to join, he was an undertaker, I had to join his burial. And I had to, for the $600 I borrowed, I had to pay him back $848 for interest on the $600 for a short length of time. When I was in service, the men from different cities, they know that we didn't register and vote here in Tennessee, in Fayette County anyway. And they would joke us about what was we doing over there if we couldn't register and vote. And we said fighting for our country. And he said, they said you ain't got no country, you don't register.
What it meant to be a sharecropper is that this person is living on the land, and one half of what they receive as a crop goes to the landowner. One half of the crop. If it's cotton, they get one half of that. If it's corn, they get a half of that. They get a half of everything that you produce on that land.
And their home?
So, given half of their crop is paying the rent for living on the farm. Yeah,
Unfair.
it was a bad arrangement, but the people just, this was the only way of life they knew. Those people that were sharecropping, this is what they knew, and they settled for it. One thing that was bad about it, many sharecroppers could not keep up with what their portion should have been. Because you had many cases where the landowner would handle all of the transaction of the crop. You pick it out, but they tell you where to take it to the gin, or they take it to the gin to gin their cotton, and they come back and give you whatever they decide to hand to you. You don't know whether you're getting your fair share. You might think you're not getting it, but at least you didn't get it and you didn't argue with them about it. Well, when they were told after they harvested their crops that we don't need you anymore, you've got to move, they had to go. Many of them didn't have anywhere to go, but they had to get off their land. And that's when many of them came to the Civic League and said, they put me off the land. They say I did something I shouldn't have done. I registered to vote, and I don't have anywhere to go. So that's when the tents came into play. This idea came about through John. He suggested tents. I think John had some memory of some of the uses of tents from the military. And we didn't have money in the Civic League to purchase the tents, so we appealed to the nation for help. And people sent money in to help us. And some people bought tents and shipped them in.
I talked to my husband. I said, he said, we got to move. Said, we got to move. We better get out and try to find some place to go because it's going to be winter here in a little bit. And so when we go out to look for a place to try to live and to find a move to, then we find out that every place you went to, they turn you down because of the same thing, you know. And then there wasn't any place to go. Well, and there was a church that called the people together after they find out that they been put out because of that, and said that they was going to try to get us some help by getting a tent because Mr. Shepherd Toad had some land, and he said if they can find maybe a shelter, a tent or something that they can get on, and we was thinking like a few days until they can find some place to go, that they can just set it up here on my place until they can find a better place. Well, they got the tents for us and they set it down. A cold day in November, I remember it. The ground was froze so hard. The first night, I remember so well, the first night that we moved to Tent City, the ground was just really frozen real hard. And we just knocked the grass down, and my husband came up to Mr. McFerrin, and they got cardboard boxes, and they split those boxes open, and they spreaded them down on that grass. And then we set our bed up in a little heater to warm by, and maybe had a dresser, or maybe just a little small dresser that could get in there, and we had a couple of 2 or 3 chairs sitting around in there. But after we closed up for the night and it began to get a little warm in there, then the ground began to throw up underneath. And that made the cardboard get water come through to the cardboard. And we had to sit there until we went to bed, or just sit there until it got warm enough that dried out. It took it a while, not that particular night, but it took it maybe the next day or the next day before we got the cardboard dried out real good. Well, you know, I didn't think there was any trouble. You know, I didn't think when you're not doing anything wrong that should be trouble, and I didn't think when you register to vote why trouble could come out of it. But I was wrong. I was wrong because after we got registered to vote, the landlord, he did, Mr. Leatherwood, you know, he told us that we had to move because of that. And because we asked him why, and he said because of that registered voting mess. Says if you hadn't went and messed with that registered and voting, then you wouldn't have had to move.
Me and her and the 4 kids, we lived in that tent. We cooked in that tent. We slept in that tent. 16 foot, a little bit. But in the wintertime, the tent would get like a deep freeze. Ice, solid. Solid all over. Sides and wall and top, solid. With ice. And we never did get cold.
My brother and I, we went to Allen Farm, and had a lease of 5 years, and we worked it down there. We farmed. I was a renter, and I made a good crop and I made a good living down there. And in 1959, I registered to vote, and they took the land from me and told me I had to move in December. So leaf rain was in August. When you go to December, it was past the deadline. Every leaf was from August to August. You know you had to move in August, but I had to move in December, around the middle of December, and when they told me. Well, I found a little house my dad had rented from John McFan, brother Robert McFan. He had it, and I moved there, and I'm still there today, and I did a lot of addition onto it, and I finally purchased it years later.
We made contact with Mount Olive Baptist Church offices, and they worked with their membership and their pastor to allow us to use the church whenever they didn't have a use for it. And we started meeting there. We could accommodate more people there than we could in any other space that we had access to.
Myself, Hopman Jameson, Curry Porter Boyd, and Estes went to Washington to talk to the Justice Department about the situation. The Justice Department, which John Doe was a civil rights commissioner, Hal Franner was a top civil rights lawyer in that department. They filed a suit in Memphis and got injunction. They had a hearing in Memphis about making the sharecropping move. Then they lost in Memphis. They appealed it to the Cincinnati Court of Appeal. They was 3 judges up there. I went up out of that trial. They ruled that you could not make the tenant farmer move.
Yes, we feel as Fayette Countyans that we have a choice. We feel that we should be citizens to register and vote as any other people.
In 1960, due to the boycott, the economic boycott that was placed against Afro-Americans. And many of us could not purchase goods and services in Fayette County. It was then that John decided to rent the little store that his brother operated. But the brother had relocated because of the pressure. And it was our feeling that if we opened that store, that many of the items that people had to drive out of town to get could be provided there on the local level.
We started to work the whole issue of equal accommodations for the first time, because the civil rights law that said you can't discriminate in restaurants and other, private places of accommodation had been passed. So the next question was testing that. And so in the spring sometime, and I think the newspapers will confirm the dates on this, of 1965, we had a series of sit-ins around the town square in Somerville, where we're going to walk in and ask to be served. We wanted to show that it was okay for white and black people to walk into a place and this was going on all over Somerville, in all the restaurants. And it was a really funky little place. I mean, you wouldn't have wanted to. I remember Eunice saying, why would anybody want to go in there? But we went in, and the older man who was behind the counter said, I'll serve all you niggers, but not that son of a bitch over there pointing at me. So here comes another out-of-body experience. I say, why not? I wanted to have a conversation. He says, you son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you. And he reaches down behind the counter. And I remember thinking, okay, he's coming up with either a baseball bat or a gun. If he comes up with a baseball bat, I'm okay, because I'm young, I can avoid it. If he comes up with a gun, I'm out of here. He came up with a baseball bat. And I had never had kind of nonviolence training, but I hit the floor like this. And he took a whack at me and hit me a glancing blow on the shoulder or something. I was moving. My brother, bless his heart, jumps right on top of me. He's going to protect his baby brother. Boom, he's out there. And I hear the bat hit his head. Boom, and I hear the breath coming out of him. He's been smacked good. And I remember thinking, oh boy, Mom is going to be upset. And then the next thing I knew was that I knew two things that happened. Jerry Jenkins was in that group, I think. And Jerry grabbed the bat out of the guy's hand. Next thing that happens is that Hardy Fry comes roaring into this place, all 200 pounds of him, grabs me, grabs my brother, and said, we're getting out of here. And I've always been quite grateful to Hardy for doing that. It was a really good idea to get me out of there and get him out of there. And I sort of retreated, probably back to John's store.
During the period that we were here in Fayette County, things were really blowing up in Selma. This was the time of the March in Selma, and around the events in Selma, 3 people were murdered. There was Jimmy Lee Jackson, there was Reverend James Reeb, and there was Viola Liuzzo. And it shook us up, and it caused us a great deal of pain. And we decided that we would stop work one day and that we would join the members of the community here on a memorial march into town. And I would say there must have been 300 people or so who gathered at John McFerrin's store. Someone led us in a prayer, and people were supported by prayer and faith at that time. And then we formed a double file line and just started marching down the highway towards town. And because we could only be 2 abreast, it was a very long line. I don't know how long it went, but several hundred yards. And cars drove by very slowly, looking at us. They were all very interested. But there might have been some catcalls and stuff, but there were no incidents. The whole thing went without incident. We got into town. We gathered around the courthouse. John McFerrin got up on the steps of the courthouse and he made a speech, and he talked about how terrible the violence was and how we all hoped it would end, and how our civil rights work was a way of changing things. And once again, like that first day when we all held hands and sang "We Shall Overcome," it was a funny thing. I barely knew I existed. It was like I was part of some much larger organism. And on the other hand, I'd never felt more alive. It was a wonderful feeling, and it was a sad occasion, but there we were, letting people know that we weren't going to put up with it.
Schools were definitely not equal in those days. They were separate, all right enough, but definitely not equal. There were many things that we didn't have. First of all, we went to split schools. We started the school in July because we had finished chopping cotton. So we would start the school in July, and then we would go to school until September, and in September it would be time to harvest or pick the cotton. So we would have to be out of school from 1st of September until Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was a magic date that we'd try to complete everything by Thanksgiving, and then we would start back to school again. The classes were very overcrowded at that time. I can remember having a class on a stage in a gymnasium where we had over 100 people in one class, and it was just impossible to teach all those students with that many people in one class. Oftentimes we had to share books. You would take a book home one day and somebody else would take the book home the next day. But it was definitely not an equal education. In those days, there weren't any blacks in any of the textbooks we used, whether it was music, baseball, history. You never saw a black face. Also in the community where you grew up, you didn't see black people doing certain things. For example, when we would walk up to the grocery store, when the Coca-Cola truck came or the bread truck came or the milk truck came, they were always whites driving those trucks. So you learn right off that these jobs are only for whites. And then your textbooks didn't show anything. So it gives you a stigma that black people can't do these kinds of things because we don't see them in the books, and we didn't have any television at that time. However, there weren't any blacks on television either at that time, unless there was some stereotype program like Amos and Andy.
I was a part of the first group to integrate the schools in 1965. I was a senior at that time. Had been basically in the desegregated school for my freshman, sophomore, junior year, and the senior year now proceeding to the all-white school. The first day truly was a day of hell. I truly do not believe that I, nor any of us, and to be very candid with you, it was approximately 8 of us that embarked upon this. There were, the schools were integrated, the freshman class and the senior class were the group that somehow or another was chosen to be the 2 grades that were being integrated, so the 9th and the 12th grade were the grades that were being integrated. We met that day prior to the day of school starting, and Mrs. McFerrin and various other members of the black community, the Civic Welfare League activity, had got us together and tried to give us a feel for what to expect, because they had already been told that the attempt would be to run us away, really, for us not to be able to succeed that first day, because that first day was a very crucial day. The white community of the school perceived that if they were able for us to run us away that day, that this would be a failure, and that we were determined that we were not going to be turned away.
For the most part, I think that the indigenous kind of leadership that existed here in Fayette County was pretty unique. And so that was a different situation. So it was also different for somebody that was coming here. We weren't as vulnerable then, I think, because the focus wasn't on us. It was on indigenous leadership. That's who the threat was.
Number one, we are able to register and vote. I think that's the best change.